Hey everyone, Pastor Roger here. So, a reminder before we begin our gospel reading and sermon for the second Sunday after Pentecost. Next Sunday on June 21st, we're going to begin gathering for outdoor worship in the church parking lot. That's next Sunday, June 21st, and we're going to meet at 7 p.m. So, later than what we're used to. Bring a lawn chair to sit and to space out through the parking lot. And we do ask that you park along the adjacent streets or across the road from us. That way we have plenty of room in the parking lot for everyone to spread out and keep our social distancing from each other. So with that said, I look forward to seeing you next Sunday. And for today, our gospel reading is from the 9th and 10th chapters of Matthew. Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits, to cast them out, and to cure every disease and every sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, also known as Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanian, and Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions: "Go nowhere among the Gentiles, and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. As you go, proclaim the good news. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without payment, give without payment." The gospel of our Lord. So I want you to keep this in mind as we go through the sermon today. Understanding our relationships is key to understanding who we are. Remember that. Our relationships help us to know who we are. Think about the way that we call Jesus the Son of God. Now, we know that it's not meant in a physical sense because God the Father has no physical body. So it's important for us to think about what that teaches us when it comes to the relationship about who Jesus is when we say the Son of God. Now, here's the thing. Many of you out there are parents. Many of you have children that are grown and are out on their own now. Many of you still have small children, and many of you have teenagers that are in that time of life where they're no longer small, but they're not quite grown yet either. So, even if you are not a parent, whether by choice or by circumstance, you'll still be able to relate to what I'm about to say because we've all been children. And whether the family that you come from is by birth, by adoption, by whatever means your family has come together, that's going to be important in understanding who you are. Oftentimes, we see the faces of our loved ones in our children or in ourselves. How many times have you seen your child or your grandchild and noticed the similarities that they share with yourself or another one of your relatives? For instance, as I lose more and more hair, when I look in the mirror, I can't help but think about my 4 uncles on my mother's side. Between the 4 of them, they've got about enough hair to cover one person's head. So you can imagine, as this gets a little farther back, each time I think more and more of them when I look in the mirror. Or maybe you've heard that you have your dad's nose or you have your grandmother's eyes. We often reflect and resemble those people that we're related to, and we have a tendency of seeing them in us or in our children. Now, one of the interesting things in my life is that my route to being a parent was a little bit of a different one. I adopted Addie and Sawyer from foster care, and now I am newly a stepdad to a really great 17-year-old. But one of the things that stands out in my situation is that none of my kids are mine by biology. None of them share my genetics with me. So even though I don't see myself reflected in their smile or in their hair color, I see myself in them in different ways. And I see them do some of the things that I've done or act the way that I act. They tend to be strong-willed kids. Now, I hear that's a good thing for people, but I assume that's for when they grow up, right? Because it can make parenting interesting. Or, like me, sometimes I see that it really takes some convincing to get them to change their minds. Sometimes they have to try their way and they have to fail until they believe me that I knew what I was talking about or something. I'm sure that I'm not the only parent out there with a story like that, or probably the one that remembers trying that as a kid. So, one of my kids even had to correct me when it came time for church liturgy, because that's the other thing about this is the kids that we raise tend to have a way of caring for the things that we teach them to care about. So one night I had prepared supper and put it on the table, and there's a liturgy for communion, and it says, "Come to the table of the Lord." Well, after I had put supper on the table, I went to the kids and I sang instead, "Come to the table of the dad." And sure enough, I had a 5-year-old put their hands on their hips and turn to me and say, "Daddy, it's Lord." So even at 5 years old, they weren't going to have me change the words to our music because they had learned that that was important. Now, the point of all of what I'm trying to say there is that whether it's through physical appearance or behavior or through values, we have an impact on the people that come after us, just as we were impacted by the people that came before us. Sometimes we're aware of who we influence and who has influenced us, while other times we may not even realize the way that we all affect each other around us. How we live and how we understand life is always affected by the people that are involved in our lives. The families that we come from and the families that we grow up with help us to know who we are. They help to inform us in who we are. Now, my family tree tends to be a great example of this. I spent some work last year tracing back my family lineage for nearly 400 years, and I discovered that with the exception of only a couple generations, almost all of those generations had farmed or raised livestock. That's how they made their living. And so I figure it's no surprise that I find myself being more comfortable in small towns and farming communities, and it just makes sense when I learned about all that. Now, I'm sure that if you look back into your family, you can see similar things that have led to you being who it is that you are today. Sometimes we grow up a certain way, and that is who we are. Other times we grow up a certain way, and it teaches us that we are someone else. Whichever way that goes, understanding our identity is tied in to understanding our relationships. And I believe that's on full display in today's gospel reading. I love all the details that are woven into this passage from Matthew. There's enough there that I think that you could do a dozen sermons from it in a row without exhausting all the details here. Don't worry, that's not what I'm going to do though. So, in this passage, Jesus teaches some really amazing things and he makes some really fantastic connections, things that may not seem connected at first. Now, remember what I keep saying. Our relationships and our families help to tell us who we are. In this text, Jesus to his disciples, he's claiming them in as his own as he commissions them. In doing so, in doing that, he's reminding them and he's reminding us, as much as we may come from our families and our ancestors, that our true origin, our true originator is God. Whether we have a great relationship with our family or a terrible one, God as our creator predates, comes before even the closest of our family relationships. And as such, our identity as children of God is our prime identity. It can't be hijacked, it can't be defeated. It is who you are. It's inalienable to you, you baptized children of God. Look at how Jesus does this with his disciples. When the reading for today started, it opened with these words. Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness. That's how this reading today, and in Matthew, in this portion, that's how Matthew is summarizing, how he's describing the mission that Jesus is carrying out. And so, when Jesus looks around, he sees a world in need. And following that mission that he's on, he gathers his disciples and he sends them out. These words is how he says it, starting in verse 7. As you go, proclaim the good news, cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without payment, give without payment. Now hold on a moment. You may notice that the mission that Jesus gives to his followers is the same mission that Matthew said Jesus himself was on. So why would Jesus do that? What is he saying? Was he just tired and wanted a break? Was he just telling the disciples what to do? No, it's a lot more than that. When Jesus commissions them, he is bringing them into God's mission of redemption for the world. He is telling them what to do, but even more than that, he's telling them who they are. Whatever else the world has told them about who they are, Jesus is claiming them over and beyond that. Whoever else they may be, Jesus is saying that they are his. And to show that, he's telling them that they belong to his mission also. And so he sends them out to serve in it. Church, people listening, that is who you are as well. You are beloved children of God, called into the mission of your Holy Father to love the world at its worst and help it see its best. Your relationship with Jesus, with God, is much less about telling you exactly what to do than it is about Jesus telling you who you are. You are someone that Jesus was willing to die for. You are someone that Jesus was ready to absorb our sinfulness and to take it to die upon the cross with himself. That is who you are. You are loved, and by the cross of Jesus, you are made whole. So one other thing that I want to emphasize to close out the sermon today is towards the beginning of the reading, there's this beautiful part where it really connects and further emphasizes that relationship aspect. In verse 36 of the reading, it says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And compassion is a strong word, isn't it? That's something that we need more of in this world as we look at what's going on around us. We know that we need to have compassion for one another, that that's the only way to combat the hate and things that go against God's love. But in that verse 36, the word in the Greek New Testament that gets translated as compassion is a very strong, it's a very descriptive, it's a very graphic word. Now, it's also a tongue twister that I'm probably going to say the Greek word wrong. So, but it's splachnidzome. And what it is it means more than just seeing someone and thinking that person needs your help. It's more than Jesus just looking at people and thinking, oh, I should help over here. That splachnidzomai literally meant guts. It was the inner organs, like the heart and the lungs, and it was associated with sacrifices that were made. So when we think about that kind of word for compassion, not just that feeling, but that feeling it deep within, that deep within his being, it means that at the sight of his people being helpless, being weary, Jesus looks at them and he feels that pain deep within him. Our distress, the hopelessness disturbed him deep within his guts. So, how does Jesus respond? What does he do? He goes out and he loves people. He cures them, he heals them, he frees them. Then he gathers his disciples and he sends them out to do the same thing. And now he gathers us together and sends us out to love people. And Jesus himself goes to the extreme of that love, going to the cross to give himself for us, that we will live and know eternal life. People of God, remember where we started with this. Understanding our relationships is key to understanding who we are. This relationship with Jesus, this knowing the Son of God has called you his own, it changes everything and it tells you who you are. Thanks be to God. Amen.